In these troubled times, we could all use a bit of inspiration and some inspirational storytelling. And we should be out there celebrating the success of our fellow Aussies in sport, business, and entertainment all over the world. There's so many Australians that grow up half a world away from Europe and America, dreaming of doing things on the world stage. And those dreams are increasingly become a reality as this current generation can look to those who have gone before them over the last decade and take inspiration to chase their dreams overseas. About 10 years ago, I came up with the idea for Aussies Abroad, the chance to go around the world and catch up with all these amazing people doing incredible things. And I was fortunate enough to do exactly that for 5 years. All over the globe, all sorts of athletes, all amazing stories, so inspirational in their own right. And we were very much at the front of the wave then. The wave of Australians heading overseas was just starting to happen. But you fast forward 5 or 10 years and there's Aussies all over the place and it's fantastic to see. So the time is right to bring Aussies Abroad back. I first met Corey McKernan, the ex-AFL player, when he was running a successful tour company, going to the big events like the Super Bowl and the US Masters. I was there covering Aussies Abroad, and as Aussies Abroad so often do, Corey, we caught up, we met, we exchanged tales, we became mates and had some fantastic experiences.
Yeah, we did, Jace. We had some fantastic times, but look, there's nothing better than going to those major sporting events and seeing the Aussie flag flying high. And look, we've both been there to see the Aussies at their finest. And I think that common bond that we share, that we love seeing the great Aussie stories and taking on the world, it's something that's attracted me to Aussies Abroad for many years and really looking forward to doing it.
Our international athletes, our business people, our entertainers are so often out of sight, out of mind. And we want to find those stories and share those stories with you. We all need a little bit of inspiration from other people's success, and there's so many great stories out there to share. So Aussies Abroad is back. It's back as a weekly vodcast and podcast. We're going to wrap up the latest news and scores and analysis with our team of expert contributors right around the world in their chosen fields of endeavour. We've got some fantastic names, some real great minds that we're going to share with you over the next few weeks. So we'll cover off the news, we'll cover off the views, and then we're going to have special guests, deep feature interviews where we go behind the scenes and we dig deep into their backstories and find out how did they get to where they are today? What were those critical sliding door moments where they headed off overseas, left their life behind and made it work for them? Lots to look forward to, lots to get into. So let's get stuck into it. There are so many fantastic stories of Australians doing amazing things all around the world. We can't possibly keep track of them all, but you can help us. So if you know of any Australians doing amazing things in sport, business, or entertainment, reach out to us on our social channels and let us know. We're happy to follow them up and chase them down and share their stories. You can go to us on Twitter at Aussies_abroad. We've got a whole range of Aussies that we're already following right around the world. So if you follow our feed there at Aussies_abroad, you too can find out and work out who you'd like to follow around the globe. And we're also on Instagram and Facebook at Aussies Abroad TV. Aussies Abroad TV on Instagram and Facebook. It doesn't have to just be the big names. In fact, Corey, what we've found over the years is that it's the quiet achievers, the unknown gems that sometimes have the best backstories.
We do. We want you're 100% right, Jace. We want those gems that are out there. We want those unknown stories. We really want to find out about those guys and really highlight them because, as you said, the stories that they bring to the table of the adversity and the things that they actually go through to compete on a world stage, they're the ones that we really are desperate to know about.
So we're constantly compiling and updating that list. So please follow us on social media. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, updates and profiles. And we'll link to all sorts of fantastic content you can find online from right around the world. It's time now for our Aussies Abroad News Wrap. Now, it's almost a full-time job trying to keep track of what Aussies are doing what all over the world. So sit back and let us do the legwork for you. Every week, we'll come up with our Aussies Abroad News Wrap where we find the best stories, the latest results, and the greatest updates of what's been happening around the world. And we'll put them all in our social feed. So once again, you can follow us. We'll link to all the great articles, the profiles, score updates, the links to the tweets from the athletes themselves to keep us up to date with who's doing what around the globe. And we're really designing that Central Aussies Abroad feed to be a resource for you, somewhere where you can check out who we're following, get ideas about which Aussies you'd like to follow. We're going to begin our news wrap this week with motorsport. It was a really busy weekend for Aussies around the globe. And the big headline for Australia was an Aussie 1-2 at the Formula 3 event in Catalonia in Spain. Melbourne's Oscar Piastri started race 2 in 5th position, but a super opening lap saw him rocket up into the race lead by midway through the lap. Fellow Aussie Alex Peroni settled into 3rd. He then worked his way up to 2nd. There was a safety car, but the Aussies managed to hold on to their top 2 spots. So fantastic result for Oscar, who stormed away for his 2nd win of the season. Moves him to within a point of the championship lead. And given that Formula 3 is the breeding ground for Formula 1, it augurs really well for Oscar in the future. And well done also to Alex, who recorded his best finish in his F3 career, coming in 2nd spot. Unfortunately, not such a great weekend for Daniel Ricciardo at Catalonia in the Formula 1. He started from 13th on the grid, never really challenged. He started on medium tyres when most of the field started on soft, so that he had a chance to run a bit longer in that first stint. But really, the Renault just didn't have the pace on a track where passing's pretty difficult at the best of times. So in the end, he had to settle for 11th position, 2 spots ahead of his teammate Esteban Ocon, and what's panning out to be a pretty disappointing season. Well, over in the US, still on motorsport, it was a really busy weekend for James Davison. He pulled double duty. Saturday, qualifying for the Indy 500, which is on next Monday morning, Australian time. He'll start 27th at the Brickyard. Fellow Aussie Will Power to start from 22nd. And then James dashed out of Indy, jumped on a jet, flew to Daytona in Florida to race NASCAR on Sunday, where he finished in 30th position. So a busy weekend for James Davison. And we'll look ahead and review Will Power and James Davison in the Indy 500 next week. From 4 wheels to 2, great result for Jack Miller in the Austrian Grand Prix at the Red Bull Ring, the MotoGP event. And he started from the front row in 2nd position. He rocketed to the front after a great start. There was a horror crash mid-race, which, Corey, you might have seen this on social media and the news. It so could have ended up in absolute disaster. Valentino Rossi and Maverick Vinales, after a couple of those riderless bikes, just screamed across the track and somehow missed them at 200 k's an hour.
Mate, they are incredibly brave. They talk about jockeys being brave, but they're at a different level all again. They go a little bit faster than horses, Jay, so I wouldn't want to be on some of those motorbikes. But yeah, look, as you mentioned, incredibly lucky that they all walked away with it unscathed.
Yeah, it's a fine line between bravery and stupidity at times, isn't it? Those blokes are crazy brave. So the race was red flagged, as you'd imagine. The track had to be cleared. Jack Miller decided to then roll the dice. He put soft tyres on the front and the rear, which allowed him to get away and get to the front early on, but he knew the tyres were going to fade in those warm conditions, and sure enough, they did. He got passed by Andrea Dovizioso, and then, to be fair to Jack, rode a fantastic defensive race late to try and hold on to 2nd spot. In the end, he lost it at the very last corner, so he finished 3rd. So his first podium of the season. So in the end, a pretty good result for Jack Miller. Disappointment, however, in the Moto2 race for Remy Gardner, who's the son of Aussie World Champion Wayne Gardner. Actually started on pole after breaking the lap record. He was sitting 5th. There was an awful crash in this race too, an absolutely horrible crash, which again, fortunately, everyone managed to walk away from. He looked headed for at least a podium finish, but unfortunately dropped the bike entering turn 1 with about 9 laps to go. So disappointing, do not finish for the 22-year-old. Otherwise, a really promising weekend for Remy, one to look forward to in the coming weeks. Still on 2 wheels, we head to the world of cycling, and Aussie Caleb Ewan in stage 1 of the Tour de Wallonie in Belgium, this year being run over 4 days. Heavy rain set in with about an hour to go, made the cobblestones on the finishing circuit more than a little treacherous. Caleb's Lotto Soudal team did a really good job, kept him close to the front. He held back. The other sprinters played their cards a little bit early. He timed his run to perfection, flew over the top, and in the end collected the win. So it was a fantastic result for Caleb Ewan, his first stage win since the cycling season restarted. No action for Michael Matthews over the weekend. He had a horrible incident last week in the Milan-San Remo. In the closing stages, he actually got squeezed up against a brick wall, and the handlebars got wedged up against it, and it took all the skin off his hand. And he had a couple of really big gaping holes, blood going everywhere. At the time, he was thinking about pulling out of the race immediately and going straight to hospital. This is how gutsy these guys are. He kept going. And in the end, he actually finished 3rd, collected his trophy. And there's an unbelievable photo on social media of Michael Matthews' 3rd place trophy alongside his racing cleats, which are covered in his own blood. But in the end, had the hand stitched up, couldn't race this weekend, couldn't hang onto the handlebars properly. So obviously couldn't control the bike. So took a week off for safety reasons, and hopefully Bling will be back in action next weekend. And speaking of next week, we're going to preview the Tour de France on our Aussies Abroad show next week. Lots of Aussie hopes in there, as always, one of the great events on the sporting calendar. So time now for our Aussies Abroad of the week.
Well, thanks, Jace. This will be my favourite segment every week, where I get to talk about the great Aussie performance of the week. And how could you go past this one in Chloe McKernan, where she broke the men's world record for the greatest number of English Channel crossings. Now, the thing that I also found remarkable about this, she did 4 trips in 16 days, 35 kilometres per trip. Now, that's a little bit further than you usually swim in your budgie smugglers in the backyard, Jace. Now, the other thing, she owns the Australian record. She passed the great Des Renford on 21. She's also holds the longest ever unassisted ocean swim in the Bahamas in 2014. Just a lazy 124 kilometres with that. She's the first Aussie to do the triple non-stop crossing. I actually watched something on YouTube. She tried to do 4, but just stopped at 3. We won't hold that against her. Look, the other great thing that she did with this, she was raising awareness for domestic violence, which was a great cause. Look, just in her preparation, I mean, to do this sort of swim, just swims a lazy 110 to 140 Ks a week, which is, I mean, a few times up and down the swimming pool at your local pool. But she's got 8 more swims to get the actual record, which is held by women, which is 43. So she's got 8 to go. So, Chloe, you're the epitome of what Aussies Abroad is all about, a quiet achiever who chases their dreams. And for that, you're our Aussie Abroad of the week.
Yeah, it's a fantastic story, Corey, isn't it? Absolutely great. And people like Chloe are exactly what we're talking about here in Aussies Abroad. Done all these amazing things, holds all these incredible world records, but doesn't really get the public recognition and notoriety that she deserves. So we're delighted to be able to feature her on Aussies Abroad. And look, we're always on the lookout for great Australian stories to have a gander at, and which for our non-Aussie friends, of course, means have a look at. This week's that we've found is Aussie professional wrestler Bronson Reid. Now, Fox Sports' Max Lawton has done a fantastic profile piece on Bronson, who's from Adelaide, and we've linked that piece to our social feed so you can have a gander at it. Bronson spent the last 13 years working his way up from a local wrestling school in Adelaide through the ranks here in Australia over to America, and now he finds himself on one of the WWE's biggest stages, NXT TakeOver, and he's one of a number of Aussies doing some great things over there in professional wrestling alongside the likes of Rhea Ripley, Shane Thorne, Indy Hartwell, Buddy Murphy, who's on Raw. So great for them to have a little Aussie support network amongst themselves to lean on each other. And Bronson and his wife Paige are based in Orlando over in Florida. He hasn't been home for 18 months. Says he'd do just about anything to have a meat pie. And Corey, given he's a powerhouse. He's 5'11" and about 150 kilos. So I'm tipping that pie wouldn't last too long.
Well, that pie wouldn't last long, Jace. But look, I know for those people who follow their wrestling, and I do, I don't follow it religiously, but I do take a keen eye on it. That was Triple H. He's the one who oversees everything to do with NXT, and he created, it was sort of like a feeder level that goes into Raw and those sort of things, as you mentioned. So
like a development league.
It is. So for a lot of our guys out there that are, I mean, we all grew up, we all watched WrestleMania, and we saw The Rock, Stone Cold, and all these guys in wrestling. And look, it'd be great to see some of our Aussies flying the flag and hopefully see them one day at WrestleMania. Yeah,
we have got a couple of Aussies that have done some great things in recent years, some of those names I just mentioned. But it's a great story. Log on to our socials. Check out the story of Bronson Reid. Well, it's time now to welcome in this week's special guest. Well, our special guest this week first hit the radar of Aussie sports fans with his fine work for Fox Sports News in Australia for about a decade, and then moved across to Network 10's golf coverage. These days he resides in Canada with his family. He's become well known to golf fans all around the world for his work with CBS and Fox, and also for video gamers, his commentary on the upcoming video game PGA Tour 2K21. And it really is an amazing story, because to be a foreign voice in America for US sports fans is an amazing achievement, because like Australians, they're very, very parochial. They like to hear local voices on their coverage. So for Luke Elvy, it's been an amazing story, a tough path to navigate, and we welcome him to Aussies Abroad. Luke, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Jason. It's a pleasure to be with you, and thanks for having me on. It's funny hearing all that because you cut a similar path, spending some time in the United States. You know it only too well.
Well, yeah, it's you and I have had very similar paths in many, many ways, and it's really for you now an exciting time, isn't it? For Aussie golf and for all the Aussies that are doing things around the world. It's fantastic for you to be based so centrally to where the heartland of where golf really happens. Much harder to be a golf reporter half a world away from where the action's taking place.
Yeah, no question, Jason. I mean, we see it with our better pros, don't we? They end up in the United States. They have to go abroad really to make it in the game because, sadly, the world tours have become so big. We know about Asia and Europe and whatever, but really, the United States with the PGA Tour and its secondary tours and also the feeder tours, if you want to make it in the game, you got to go get on a plane and go and do it. And for me, when I got that opportunity after 10 years at Fox Sports in Australia to front golf for Network 10, very quickly it dawned on me that, my future would pretty much lie in the United States if I was to continue to do it full time. And thankfully, I've said it a number of times, I owe a debt of gratitude to Ian Baker Finch, who was my right-hand man there at Network 10 in the 18th Tower. He said very quickly to me in our time together, he said, mate, you got to come over with me in the States. You do a great job over there and I'd happily tuck you under my wing, which he did.
It's a very good point you make. Every Aussie abroad has to step off the cliff at some stage, take that big chance, roll the dice and hope that it works. And we're seeing a bunch of Aussies at the moment, some of whom have done it successfully and others that are starting to come through. And Corey McKernan, you're the big golf nut on this panel. So I'll leave it over to you to start talking to Luke about some of the Aussies that are going around and just the general state of the Australian game around the world.
Yeah, thanks, Jace. Well, Luke, it is a little bit frustrating that when you think of the year that the start of the year that we actually got off to, you had Cam Smith winning, you had Leishman in great form, he won. You've had Jason Day doing great things, Gabby Ruffles at the USGA Amateur on the weekend. Do you feel like, look, they're doing such great things in the space in America, but what about the state of the game here in Australia and our inability with these major golf tournaments? Because as I mentioned, there's a lot to like about what we're doing in golf, but yet the state of the game here in Australia is left behind.
Yeah, that's been heartbreaking, to be fair, Corey. And you know it only too well as well. You've spent a bunch of time over here in the US and North America with the tours to the majors, and you become close to Jason Day and Adam Scott and all these players. I mean, you talk about that winning list to start the year. We had Wade Ormsby won in Hong Kong like the second week of the year, and then Lucas Herbert won on Australia Day the same time Mark Leishman did in the US when Herbie won in the over in the United Arab Emirates. And then obviously Adam Scott won in Riviera just before COVID struck, and it was just this boom start to the year off the back of a phenomenal President's Cup at Royal Melbourne and this momentum again in the game. But I lived all through that in 2011 in Australia. We had all the best players in the world competing in our Australian Opens and PGAs on either side of the President's Cup. And it's glorious scenes for Australian golf, but it only lasts for such a small window because, unfortunately, the bulk of the year is overseas. And our guys and girls have got to go over and just live there for an entire year. We had Hannah Green win that ladies PGA last year. It was such a phenomenal performance. And look, had that happened in Australia, on Australian soil, she'd be a much bigger star than what she is at this stage, given the fact that we barely get to be exposed to her on a regular basis. We've talked about it till we're blue in the face about Jason Day. You know, the amount of mud that gets thrown at this guy, it breaks my heart because he is just the most outstanding young fella. He adores Australia. His heart is with Australia. It's just that his family and life is in the United States. And he can't keep making sacrifices to his family for his career just to come back to Australia, and yet he gets treated like he doesn't care about Australia, so we don't care about Jason Day, and it's completely wrong. It couldn't be so far wrong it's not funny, But this is the world we live in these days, that if it hasn't happened in front of you or at our doorstep, people don't seem to want to absorb it or appreciate it.
Yeah. That's exactly what Aussies Abroad's all about, isn't it, Corey? That's why we're doing this, to try and spread the word around the globe of Aussies that are doing amazing things overseas and need that due recognition. And there's so many young golfers coming through as well. And we've seen in recent times, Gabby Ruffles have some fantastic results. Talk us through her performance last week at the US Women's Amateur.
Well, sadly, I didn't actually get to see much because I was on air broadcasting the PGA Championship, which Jason Day almost won again. But I've been able to catch up on some highlights. And look, we already know about Ryan Ruffles, this outstanding young, prodigious talent, the son of Ray Ruffles. And, we've seen what he's already done in his young professional career, and he's, very close to exploding through. But he might not be the best golfer in his family. Don't worry about the world. Because Gabby's just... you talk about a born winner. This girl's got it all. I think that's the first time she's ever been defeated in a USGA event. She's won the girls' amateur, she won the amateur last year, and she went it all the way to the final and lost on the 38th hole, which is 2 extra holes after regulation, by the shortest of putts, which anyone can miss under pressure. But she is the real deal. But I mentioned Hannah Green. We've got Minjee Lee, Sue O. We've got, all the guns, the young kids that have arrived on the secondary tour. We know about young Lucas Herbert, who's stepped up into the big frame now. There are probably 20 Australians that don't even rate a mention on news or coverage back home who are doing brilliant things around the world or stepping up into that world-class level that, unfortunately, you barely know about them. But do you know who plays, centre-half forward for the reserves at Collingwood? Damn right you do. And and they're in the paper every second week. So it's just the reality of Australian sport. We're blessed to be, the most saturated sports nation on earth. We've got 4 football codes, and we've got, 25 million humans. It's insane. So that's just football alone. And then you throw in cricket, our number 1 sport. And then you throw in the, tennises and the golfs and the Olympic sports and all these other things that take our attention. And it's so hard to get it as a golfer. So you have to win majors or something significant to be really on the radar. And again, that's only for a week or 2. It doesn't last.
Is there a fraternity amongst the Australian golf community for young kids coming through, some of the players that have been there and done it? I know Carrie Webb's been very supportive of Gabby Ruffles on social media. Is there that fraternity? Because everyone obviously knows what each other has gone through and the challenges that you face. So is there a network of Aussie golfers? Do they support each other?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it's not something that's talked about. Kari's done an astonishing job for the women's game for Australian girls. She's got the Curry Webb series that the best players in it get to go over and spend some time with her while she's playing in a major. They stay in the same house. Hannah Green went through that process, and she said that process enabled me to go on to live my dream and become a major champion herself. So it's starting to already pay dividends. The fellas, it's a little different now. Golf Australia has this wonderful high-performance unit that's been run for a little while. Brad James, you know it well. And that process has enabled a lot of these really talented amateurs to then step into the pro ranks, and that gives them the support. But look, any Australian that comes over to whether it's Europe or Asia or the United States, straight away the big guys, put them under their wing and say, look, come and play practice rounds with me, come out to dinner with me, or, I can help you make it as easy as possible for you to try and make it over here. Everyone looks after each other. Again, not too dissimilar to what Ian Baker Finch did for me in the broadcasting sense. So there's a real sense of community there for Australia still going forward.
Speaking of your story, let's go back to the beginning. Why golf? What was it about golf that just piqued your interest initially and then drove your passion?
I was 7 when I was introduced to the game by my father. In fact, it was Coralbin Valley, which is where Jason Day went to school, golf school, the same as Adam Scott. Stephen Bowditch went there as well, I believe, but it was where he met Cole Swatton. This is J Day, and then on to make a career. We just used to go there as a family holiday. It's on the outskirts of Brisbane. Went through disrepair, but it's back. But it had a cute little 9-holer attached to the main course, and I could go out and knock some balls around that as a 7-year-old while the parents and the adults were, out on the main course. And, whether this is serendipity or whatever, I don't know. But the very first hole I played, I'd never played it before. I just took out a 3-iron. It was a par 3 course. I think the hole wouldn't have been any more than about 110 yards or 110 metres, if you will. And I scunged one along the ground and only went about 50 yards. And I said to the person I was playing with, well, what club should I use now? And they said, I don't know, whatever you feel best to use. And I thought, well, I only hit this one 50 yards, so I'll do the same thing. And it rolled along the ground and up onto the green and then up the tier and then hit the base of the pin and went in. And this is
no way.
the very first hole of golf in my life, and I made a birdie. And I remember bouncing off the walls when I got to see my dad again. And, the golf bug bit me instantly. But it really wasn't ever, I'm a golf person specifically. I'm like every other Australian, if there were two flies crawling up a wall, I'm in the race. I want to see who wins. I'm fascinated on the outcome. And, I was probably more a rugby guy than I was a golf guy in terms of, do you want to try and take a sport to the pro ranks? But look, I realised, fortunately, at a pretty early stage, I was never going to be good enough to be a professional athlete. So the best thing would be to talk about them, which is fortunate because here we are, 20 plus years later, I'm still doing it.
I feel you, brother. Exactly the same. We could talk a good game, Dory, about that McKernan bloke. Speaking of which, Corey, have you ever had a hole in one? You've played a million rounds of golf.
No, I haven't had a hole in one, but I think the longest shot I've ever holed was probably from about 215 metres out, and that was on a par 4. So I would rather, and Luke could probably, look, I think one shot's lucky. As Luke got into the game, his whole one, and it took him for life. But no, look, I was fortunate enough to hold a 4-iron at Northern Golf Club from about 210 metres, and that's my claim to fame.
And Luke, have you had one?
Yes, I have, mate, incredibly. I'd had every hard luck story in the game because when it comes to hole-in-ones, doesn't it? I've hit it in the hole on the full, it came out. I horseshoed a 4-iron from about 200 myself, like a horseshoe, do that in a putt and it's like you feel like you've been robbed. But I literally flown back from the Players' Championship in 2010. Robert Allenby almost won that one. I was covering it for Fox Sports just before I was transitioning across to Network 10. I'd already signed the deal. And I'd flown back and I'd landed in Australia. My wife said, what are you going to do? You're just going to go and have a sleep and try and get over jet lag. And it was such a beautiful day. I thought, you know what, I'll get out and play some golf. And 6 holes in, I'd finally lived my dream and I hold an 8-iron up a hill and that's it. It's like, well, this is outstanding. I never have to have an excuse of why I don't have one anymore. I can just say, yep, I've had one.
What was your dream job as a kid?
You know what, and this might sound a little syrupy, but right from the get-go, doing what I'm doing right now, I used to listen to the Bruce McAvaney's of the world, Mike Gibson for Wide World of Sports in Australia, Jim Nance with the Masters, the Martin Tylers with football. And every time I heard these people tell these stories, I'd have it running down my face. I'd be bawling. I'd be so, so moved by these, what I now call adult fairy tales. We're brought up in life that as kids, you listen to, you hear about superheroes and you're inspired. Girls hear about princesses or, we're seeing it right now with the Frozen, miracle for Disney. Like, people love fairy tales and it inspires us because it thinks, well, maybe something magical is possible. But when we get to adults, we hear about mortgages and death and tragedy and, hard-working jobs and life's a strain. And I'm like, sport just provides us these adult fairy tales that we can all just disconnect from our real world and just live that. So for me, my two real life's heroes were Greg Norman as a golfer and Jim Nance as a broadcaster. And, I've been fortunate to get to know both. And obviously Nance has become a friend and a colleague now at CBS. And, you feel pretty privileged to get that close to the people that, inspired you to do what you do.
Just on that, Luke, what would you, if you could name the greatest line you've ever heard in golf commentary, what would it be? Because I know there's been so many immortal lines over the journey, and you and I have even had this conversation before. But if you could utter immortal words that have come out of one commentator's mouth, and I've probably got an inkling, what would it be?
Yeah, you'd think I'd go for a Jim Nance line, and he says absolute beauties, but I'm not. I'm going to go with the legendary Vern Lundquist. When Tiger Woods held that chip on 16 in 2005 and that lovely Nike ball just slowing down towards the hole and then it goes in, and he says, in your life. And I just think, that's called live, in the moment, no time to think, just natural reaction. And Jason, as a broadcaster yourself, you just know that that's what you want to do. You want to nail the big moments, and he did with that one.
It's the next best thing to playing, isn't it? For people like us that don't have the ability to be out there as a professional athlete, to be able to play some small role in a moment like that stays with you forever is the next best thing that we can ever hope for.
Exactly right. And, you know, my privilege of my career has been sitting at holes 15 and 16 at Augusta National for the last 5 or 6 years. And, you know, I've called 7 holes in one in the last 4 years. And obviously Tiger's shot to a foot to ice his green jacket last year. And, you know, you just pinch yourself. You think, I'm getting to do something that, you know, you'd amputate a limb to do it. But when there are moments that end up going viral around the world and your voice is attached to it, a bit like the Louis Oosthuizen Ricochet hole-in-one at 16, you know, I think that's been viewed over 500 million times on YouTube since, and you think, wow, it's a blessing. It really is.
It's a long way from being a copy boy at Fairfax, which is where you started out your media career. Talk us through the progression and how you ended up through school into Fairfax and then eventually making your way through to television.
So when I was 15, we had to do work experience, year 10 at school. And, you know, my dad said to me, you know, what are you interested in doing? And I said, well, gee, I'd love my sports media. I'd love to somehow, you know, do something along those lines. And fortunately for him, he'd been a fine rugby player in his day back in Sydney, and he'd known the rugby reporter at the Sydney Morning Herald. And he was able to get me a week's work there. And that was coinciding incredibly, just through dumb luck, that it was the Wallabies welcome home ticker tape parade in Sydney for winning the 91 World Cup. And there were 2 players on that tour that didn't play a minute of action. And David Knox was one, the Randwick fly half, and the other was Richard Toms, who played rugby at the rugby club I was at, the Northern Suburbs. And there was a reporter that was sent to do like a colour piece around this ticker tape parade at Town Hall. And they didn't know these people from a bar of soap. And I said, well, I do. Happy to introduce you and whatever. You know, I'm only a 15-year-old kid. You don't think anything of it. And she said, well, if you know them so well, why don't you interview them? And I did. And when we got back to the offices there at the Sydney Morning Herald, the editor called me in and he said, hey, listen, if you've, you know, interviewed these people, you may as well write up a story. You know, not that it's going to go in the paper, but do one. And I did one. And he said, he called me in the next morning. He said, can I just have a word with you? And I said, oh, no, what have I done wrong? I thought I'd overstepped the line, or I was going to get reprimanded for doing something I shouldn't have. He said, listen, that was really good. And, you know, if I wasn't paying this woman to do her job, I would have run your story. And he said, you know, if you want to do this for a living, we might have something for you. So fortunately for me, I sort of had a path set from that age that I was going to go into the newspapers, and, you know, I went in as a copy boy and sort of worked my way up from there.
And what about the progression through to TV? Was that always something that was on your radar? You wanted to get an opportunity to make it into electronic media?
Yeah, I always saw myself as like doing print, radio, television, sort of learn the whole stratosphere of media at the time, because then you'd have all the bases covered. Well, the Olympics came around in 2000 and I was a bit antsy, and I ended up doing like a presenter's course, you know, just I think Lockie Daddo worked on it a bit.
Right. And
he quickly said, listen, mate, you've got a natural gift for this. You should start heading into the print business, into the TV business quicker than you're planning. And there were 2 main factors. We all know Alex Brown in the sports media world, I think now head of comms for Cricket Australia. He was a great school friend of mine, and I actually got him into Fairfax as a copy boy behind me, because he left school the year after. And his dedication to his craft of writing just made me look like I was never going to make a cent in the business. And he was brilliant. And I just thought, yeah, I'd better talk about it rather than write about it, because I was better with the spoken word than I was the written. So I basically took a step back. I went back to being, you know, the people that take the minutes of a meeting. Gosh, I've even forgotten about it. It's 20 years ago, but I do that at Fox Sports. I do the NASCAR overnight, the golf overnight, all the sports that would come in, and you just basically, you know, take the minutes of a meeting, and then that sort of transitioned me into, you know, being on the news and hosting Fox Sports News. So it feels like, you know, 1,000 moons ago, but it also just feels like a couple of weeks ago. You know what it's like.
You had 10 years there, and it's been a great stomping ground, hasn't it? In an industry, in our industry, which has essentially stopped training people. Like back in the day, you'd get a cadetship at the age of 17 or 18 at a network, and you'd spend your entire career at the one network. Say you go into Channel 7 and they would teach you to be a production assistant or teach you to be a cameraman or an audio operator, and you would learn the craft on the job. That doesn't happen anymore. The entire industry's gone freelance. So they expect whoever it is for you to walk in and already be fully trained, 100% ready to go. So where is an opportunity for young kids like you were to get in and break into the industry? Well, in fairness to Fox Sports News, they've done a fantastic job with that over the last 20 years.
Right. And that was an absolute breeding ground. I was with them before it went to the 24/7 scenario. I was sort of a backup to, I think it was Caroline Searcy and then David Murdoch, and I'd sort of fill in after him. And then, when it went 24/7, I was like, I was made one of the main presenters, and off we went. And you know what? I loved it. It was such a privilege. You sat on that desk and basically read news for 6 hours, and you got so much live experience and thinking on your feet and everything. So, that was fantastic those days at Fox Sports News. And in a way, I always wanted to stay at Fox. I thought, I'd love to end up calling some rugby for them and calling some other sports, but I just never really got the opportunity. And so, the breakthrough happened for me around Tiger Woods. And Tiger came to Australia to play in that Australian Masters in 2009. It had been some 11 years since he'd been in the country before, and it was like the, second coming of the Pied Piper. I remember. It
was like the Beatles coming to town, wasn't it?
It was, wasn't it? I mean, there was 4 helicopters and 10,000 people at, 6:30 in the morning at Kingston Heath while he was having a practice round. It was insane, and he ended up winning that tournament. And then, as we know, literally returned to the US, and it all unravelled when he hit the fire hydrant, and the affairs were sort of laid bare. But then about 6 months later, he prepared to make his comeback at the Masters at Augusta National. And I went into the producers and said, hey, listen, we should be there for this. We should cover this. This is the biggest story in sports. I did his last event that he won in Australia. I'll go over and do the Masters. And they said, look, we'd love that to be the case, Luke, but we don't have a budget. No money to do stuff like that. So I said, well, if you can get me the accreditation, I'll pay for the rest, because I've always dreamt of going to Augusta National.
Good on you.
And they're like, all right, good for you. So they did. They got me the accreditation, and, fortunately I managed to scramble through my contacts to get a place to stay. Corey, you'll know Tony Buffler, who was the agent of a lot of players and whatever. Buff, he'd host a house, and there was one room, and I ended up staying, in this little 8-year-old girl's bed that week, and just ran myself ragged getting all this coverage. And when I got back to Australia, they said to me, listen, Lee, that was, outstanding coverage, way better than we could have imagined. We're happy to cover your invoice. So you just bill us for everything it costs you, flights, accommodation, and all the stuff, and we'll pay you back. I said, well, thanks, that was terrific. I got to live my own dream, whatever. And then a day later, I got a phone call from Network 10 saying, hey, do you want to come and have a chat to us? We've got something for you. And that's how it transitioned across from being an all-sports guy at Fox Sports News to fronting golf for Network 10.
Isn't it amazing? Sorry, Jose, when you hear all those stories about so many people, everyone looks at Luke Elvy and thinks, oh, you're lucky. But that one little moment where you've made your own luck by doing something that people wouldn't usually do, isn't it amazing when you look back at it that set you on the path to where you are now? Yeah,
Corey, that whole line, one of the golfers used to say, I think it was Gary Player, the harder I work, the luckier I get. And Tiger took it on board, and a few others. And it's really true, isn't it? I think people see the media and they're like, how do they get that? I could do that. Or, of course they could. I'm sure they could. But are they prepared to do the sacrifices and the hard work for 15, 20 years for that opportunity to then maybe get the breakthrough? And, that's what weeds out 95% of people, is they don't want to do the hard yards to put yourself in a position to perhaps get a break like that. And, that's in anything in life as well, isn't it? It's not just our industry, but it's prevalent in our industry.
Yeah.
How many times have you been asked, or if someone said to you, Luke, I want to do what you do. How'd you do that? And you say, oh, well, just 20 years of hard work and sacrifice and going broke and, hanging in there and not sure if I'm on the right path, but I'll stick it out. That's all it takes, just a couple of decades.
Jason, you know it only too well. I mean, anyone who's been in this business, I thought my career was ending twice in the last 25 years. So my answer I give to everyone, I said, do you want to hear the real answer or do you want to hear the fairy tale answer? Because I'll tell you which one of you want to hear. But they never want to hear the real answer because that sucks. that doesn't work for them.
But the great thing is it does give us an insight and an advantage, Luke, that we've both lived the Aussies Abroad life, because the path that we take is exactly the same as the path that so many of the athletes take themselves. We've lived the same experiences. We've had the same sliding door moments. We've had the same step off the cliff and hope this all works out. We've had the same, gee, if this doesn't go in our favour this week or next week or whenever the key moment is, this could be all over. So you sort of have a greater appreciation, don't you, for what other people are going through and what they've had to get to the moment that we all see, which is always the successful bit at the end when you hold the trophy up and everyone goes, oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Not realising everything that it's taken to get to that point.
Spot on. You've nailed it. It's so true. I haven't told this story too often, but in 2013, when my career had transitioned a fair bit across the US, covering the Aussies on the PGA Tour, doing the majors for Network 10. At the end of 2011, I got brought into the producer's office at Network 10, the executive producer, which was David Barnum at the time. And he said, Luke, nailed it. This summer of golf, brilliant. As far as we're concerned, if it's golf in this country, you're the man. Unfortunately for us, we've just lost golf because Packer and Murdoch have just bought 1HD. They've shut it down because they want everyone to go back to Fox Sports to subscribe to pay for their sports live on TV. And we won't have a gig for you. And you're like, I've gone from this euphoric moment of like, he's just wrapped me up deluxe. And it's like, sorry, mate, your opportunity, which you thought you were going to do for 10 years, is over. And I was like, righto. So fortunately, they paid me out for the rest of my contract. So I was able to fly to Orlando to have a crack at the Golf Channel because they had come hard for me the summer before in the US. They said, we'd love you to work for us. Well, Comcast had just bought NBC and Golf Channel independently of each other and was going to merge them, unbeknownst to me. So the person who was running the Olympics coverage for NBC was then ending up as the sort of head of the Golf Channel. But they had to wait till the end of the summer before they bring her in to do the job. So I'm sitting there in Orlando going, I'm ready to go. I'm here, guys. I can do it. And then I hosted Morning Drive a few times for them and did a couple of little bits and bobs throughout the course of that summer. But my wife was pregnant for the first time with our boy, and we weren't going to have them over in the US because, as you know, without healthcare and everything, you can't do it. So we flew back to Australia, and that opportunity that was sort of presented the year before was then taken off the table. Well, fortunately, I got a few world feed gigs with the PGA Tour to do some tournaments. And it wasn't until the summer of 2013 in the States when I went over to do the WGC at Firestone that Tiger won, the last of those 5 that year, that it coincided with the 2013 PGA up the road in Rochester, New York at Oak Hill, the one that Jason Duffner won. And I thought, you know what? I'll have one last roll of the dice. I'll go up and go to that tournament. I didn't have any media work to do, but I'll try and do a bit of networking, and who knows. Well, Finchy calls me when I got on site because we were planning to have a meal. He said, we've got a new talent guy at CBS and he's desperate to meet you. So I've set up a meeting, pop in and see him on this time. And I literally walked into the meeting on, Friday morning of tournament week. And, this guy who's gone on to be one of my best friends said to me, I'm so excited to meet you. He said, from what Ian Baker Finch tells me, he goes, you're my guy. And it was, the most glowing endorsement that I could have ever received. And he said, when Ian Baker Finch says something about, he goes, I've got to hire him. So he said, there's 150 people who are right here on this table on a, CV or a show reel. And he just slid it off the table. He said, what do you want to do? What can we do? And that was it. And I got a gig to do the Masters the next April and off we went. But, that was that fine line. I was just about done again. And it was like, here we go. So, I think I can't buy in Baker Finch enough red wine to thank him. But, he said, Luke, you've got to stop thanking me because I wouldn't have put you forward if I didn't think the world of you as well. He said, it's not me that got you the job. It's you that got you the job. It's just that I was able to happily introduce you to a few people. I was like, thank you.
Isn't it amazing when you go back in time and join the dots, things that you didn't realise were significant at the time end up being these sliding door moments. And that's all anyone's career is. One path that you happen to choose, which takes you to another crossroads, and you happen to choose one there, and somewhere it all connects itself and you end up doing what you absolutely want to be doing and love to be doing.
Can I tell you that Ian Baker Finch connection, how it all came?
Please. I'd love to hear it.
So my best mate, who was best man at my wedding, my wife and I, who's Canadian, we got married in Maui in 2005. And during that week, he met a girl from San Francisco. He was an Australian golf pro. Met her. They fell in love. A couple of years later, he moved over to San Francisco to start working. And he worked his way up at a golf course to the point where he was the assistant professional. And Finchy came out to have a round. And Finchy was playing with my best mate, Ashley Marsane, who at the time was at Meadow Club, now the head professional San Francisco Club, which is one of the top 20, 30 courses in the world. And he said, do you know my mate Elvis? My nickname's Elvis, Luke Elvy. He said he's doing the Tiger tournament in Australia. And Finchy said, well, I'd love to meet him. I'm doing it for Channel 9. He said, well, I'll introduce the two of you. We'll go and walk the course together at Kingston Heath there. And Finchy and I just got on. You know when you click with people straight away? You know, I mean, anyone who meets Ian Baker Finch says he's the nicest human on earth. But Finchy just, again, couldn't do enough for me at the time. And he was like the biggest help. And it was funny because golf was going through that transition. 9 had a couple of the big events, but 10 sort of took over the rights to the vast majority of them. And when I got hired to be the front man for 10, David White, who was the executive producer of sports, said to me, well, who do you want to be in the commentary team? And I said, we've got to have the best in the business, which is Ian Baker Finch. And he said, well, if you know him, why don't you go and try and hook him? And I called Ian, and he was just putting on the putting green in his home club back in Jupiter, Florida. And I said, Finchy, I've been given this gig, which I'm stoked about, but I don't want to do it unless you'll be my right-hand man. And he said, you know what, Luke, I'd love to. You know, I just love my mum to be able to see me a bit more. And I thought to myself, what a sweetheart. You know, this is a guy who's achieved it all. And it wasn't, oh, you know, a couple of gigs in Australia at the end of the year, that'd be nice. It was like, I'd just love to see my mum a bit more. And he took the job, and that was that sliding doors moment. Who would ever think that relationship would then foster into what it's done now? So
essentially, Ian Baker Finch would be nothing without you. You made him.
Yeah.
He should be buying you red wine, Luke Elvy.
I tell you what, he has. He's bought me more than I certainly deserve. But I stayed at his house in Florida for a month when I moved over to the States. And he said, I'd just woken up and I'd walked out into the living room. He said, oh, come in. He was in his office. And there on the desk was the claret jug. And It just stops you in your tracks. And, you know.
That's a decent alpha move, isn't it? Just have it sit there on the desk as people walk in.
I just thought, how cool is that? You know, and then, you know, since then he's told me the stories, and then his career, and, you know, the most humble, genuine, down-to-earth human who's achieved the kind of success he has. You know, I'm a 4 out of 10 compared to what he's done if he's a 10. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he's been amazing. And it's a great point you make about him wanting people at home to be able to see him and see what he does a little bit. It's certainly one of the appeals of when I was traveling around the world, catching up with athletes all over the place, to have someone from Australia telling their story back into Australia so that their friends and their family and their colleagues and people they went to school with and their neighbours could all sort of see what they've made of their lives was a really big appeal. Because these people are all over doing amazing things overseas, whether they're playing on the PGA Tour or playing in the English Premier League or the NFL or the NBA or whatever. But no one really understands what's involved in doing that and what it takes to get to that point. So as we mentioned before, there's not a lot of coverage for our overseas stars. They're out of sight, out of mind. So for any of them to be able to get some sort of publicity, it's not about PR and sponsorships and things. It's just about being able to tell their story and have people that they love understand their lives a bit more.
Right. And your Aussies Abroad series for ESPN, and, you know, the one you did independently was just such a great thing because it put people back in the spotlight who you would never have known about if you'd not done the work. One of my good friends these days is Peter Moylan, you know, the former sidewinder for
Atlanta. What a great man.
I mean, it's just one of the great sporting success stories of all time. They're talking about making a Hollywood movie about this guy.
No surprise. And I guess Brad Pitt will be playing him.
Yeah, I don't think Brad Pitt's handsman enough to play Moylan. But if I walked Peter Moylan down the street in Australia, not one human would know who he is.
Yeah, that's probably right.
But
right. What a story.
But in Atlanta, he couldn't walk through the centre of Atlanta without being stopped. He's a legend. You know, they're talking about doing a Hollywood movie about this Australian sports star who made it to the bigs in the most obscene way, and yet Peter Moylan. You know, you ask sports journalists who Peter Moylan is, and they wouldn't have a clue. They're like, never heard of him.
Yeah,
but that's
for
just
those who don't know Pete's story. Played baseball locally, worked his way up, ended up getting a gig for Australia at the actually went over and played AAA, I think it was, for the Twins.
Minor league system over the Minnesota Twins to start with. And,
Didn't like it, didn't really settle, was homesick, was there for a couple of years, never really did any good. The club sort of said, listen, we don't think you're going to make it. He said, no, I don't think this is for me. Came back, was I think a pharmaceutical salesman, wasn't he, for about 7 or 8 years, just working 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, playing baseball with his buddies on the weekend. Was good enough to go back to the World Baseball Classic for Team Australia when he was like 25. Got a bunch of major leaguers out in the World Baseball Classic.
The heart of the Dominican Republican line.
That's right. And scouts from Major League Baseball went, who's this bloke? Peter Moylan, never heard of him. He went over with one suitcase because he was supposed to be overseas for 2 weeks. They signed him. He goes straight to Atlanta, has a Major League Baseball career. It was just phenomenal.
That lasted a decade.
Yeah, it lasted a decade.
And now he's on Fox Sports South broadcasting Braves games on television. And it's just like this guy's a cult hero. And it was because he blew his shoulder out, he couldn't pitch over him anymore. So he decided to throw sidewinders, and he could throw it 90+ mile an hour. And I'll never forget, because after I did that 2010 Masters, I also went across to the Atlanta Braves and did the story on the Aussie who'd made it to the bigs.
Yeah.
And Bobby Cox was the legendary baseball manager of the Braves that took him to a couple of World Series and won something like 10 straight divisional titles and the pennant a couple of times. And I sat down in the dugout with Bobby Cox and I said, what would you do if I said there's 100 Peter Moylans back in Australia? He said, I would jump on the next flight and go and sign the lot of them. Yeah. He never spoke as highly about anyone than he did about Peter Moylan.
Such a great bloke, Pete. Such a great team, man. I remember I know we're digressing a little bit, but I went to Atlanta to do the story with Pete, and they were playing the Phillies that night. And Pete was pitching. And so I was sitting, there was the Braves dugout, a little media space, and then the Phillies dugout. And I was sitting right on the edge of the media dugout. So literally there was me, a little chain fence, which was about only waist high. And then sitting right next to me was Cole Hamels, the great pitcher for the Phillies. And he heard me speak to my crew, my camera guys, and he went, oh, you're Australian, eh? And I said, yeah. And we started talking about, why I'm here for Pete Moylan and whatever. And it was one of the great sporting experiences of my life, because I got to sit there for 9 innings and Cole Hamels talked me through a game of baseball. Pitch by pitch almost. So see what he's going to do here. He's thrown that one here. You watch what he does now. He'll throw this. It was just because he wasn't pitching, of course. You know, if you're not pitching, you're not in the rotation. You just sit in the dugout and watch the game like everyone else. It was phenomenal. It was like sit in an NFL game next to Tom Brady, who I know is one of your great heroes, and having him just talk you through the game.
Yeah, and these are the opportunities or experiences that seem to happen in the States when we start talking. It's amazing how Americans treat the Australian accent. It's almost like it's, a golden ticket to Charlie's Chocolate Factory, because they just adore us. And I don't know why, but they do. And
because we're different. It's novelty, right?
Right. It's almost like they get to fly to Australia without having to jump on a plane, which they hate to do. Yeah.
Corey, you've had lots of experience working with your golf tours and at big events around America. It is exactly the same, isn't it? You turn up at the Masters, trying to do something maybe that other people can't get away with, or at the Super Bowl. But as soon as you open your mouth and you start speaking Australian, people just go, oh, hang on, yeah, sure, no worries. It opens doors, doesn't it?
It is a very, very big fascination that they've all got with Australia. And they all say nearly en masse, and you blokes could attest to this, that every American goes, yeah, I've always wanted to go there. And you feel like saying, well, just go then.
But it's too far away, they say.
My response to that, Corey, every time I said it takes one day of your life to end up with a lifetime of memories. Just get on the plane, and they, invariably you hook them up and off they go, because they all come back saying, thank you for pushing me to finally do it. I've had the trip of a lifetime. That's true.
And you get that day back on the way back over anyway, don't you?
Right.
It all works itself out.
Yep.
Something to do with the time zones.
That might turn into an ad, Luke, if that was a little Jim Nance tourist moment, that was.
Yeah, it was. A little colour piece. Mind you, don't get on a plane right now, because no one's going anywhere.
Yeah, that's a shame, isn't it?
Luke, just to the technicalities of your job, talk us through a tournament week. How much time do you spend prepping for a tournament, and what do you actually prep? What sort of information do you focus on?
Well, as you'd be the same, Jason, with all the sports you cover, you're in it on a daily basis anyway. My organic knowledge of golf stems back to when I was a 7-year-old. I'm now 45. I've been in a golf nerd, if you will, for 35 plus years. And fortunately, I've had that weird brain that seems to remember, obscure sporting facts and moments and things that you can call upon when you need it in a broadcast. But specific preparation for a tournament, particularly majors, I would spend around about 50 to 100 hours of prep, to be ready for that. I've always said my one thing that I can do better than anyone else is prepare. Over-prepare so you don't under-deliver. This is an absolute privilege that we get to do this, and don't give them a reason to knock you off your seat or get you out of your seat. So make sure you're prepared. So I've always been that stupid, I've probably got 10 pages of too many notes, but it's amazing that, you might not use something for 15 hours on air, and then all of a sudden a moment happens, you're like, that was that nugget that I dug out, and I use it, and it just comes. It might come a month later you get to use it at a tournament. So preparation for me is everything. When I'm at the course, you're always walking the course, you're talking to the players, the caddies, coaches, agents, family members. You're just getting all this lovely knowledge that gives you the insights that then you can deliver to the viewer, because they're not there. They don't have the relationships. They don't have the ability to just say, hey, Jason, can I borrow you for 10 minutes? What's going on? And, that's I think, as a play-by-play or front man, that's our duty. Know the stories so you can tell them correctly to the people back home. And,
that's a great...
CBS main shows are probably the easiest gigs in the world, because you sit in 16 Tower, you call about 25 minutes of television in a 3-hour slot, and you're done. But when you do the digital shows and you're on for 30 plus hours a week, you got to know your stuff.
You're speaking my language there, and people say, well, in my case, why do you take 4 days to prep for one game of footy? And how much of that do you use? And I say, 5% maybe. And they go, well, why do you spend so long? I go, well, you tell me which 5% I'm going to need, and I'll just prep that.
Right.
Because you just don't know, do you? You've got to prep it all.
Dennis Cometti. Do you remember the Dennis Cometti line? Dennis used to say he would think of lines before the season began, Corey, and you were probably a handful of them, but it wouldn't be until round 18 that he could use it.
Yeah, Dennis would have, I worked a lot with Dennis. It was one of my great thrills, and he'd have them written down in a book.
Right.
And when he said them, he'd just tick them off.
Right.
But you've still got to have, and some of them were absolutely brilliant in the sense that he would have thought of them at the time, because you just had to. You couldn't have prepped it. But also just even to have the recall in that moment to go, I've prepped something. I've had to think about a play on words around a guy's name or something. It's in the back of my head somewhere, and I can just recall it instantly and drop it in at exactly the right spot. Because you don't have time at that moment to go, hang on, I've got a line here about Tony Liberatore. Hang on a minute, I'll just flip through and find it. Like he just had it there ready to go and nailed it when the time came.
And that's why he's Dennis Cometti.
That's why he's Dennis Cometti, one of the greats, one of the people I've loved working with more than anyone else. Give us your dream call. What would be your dream call? Firstly, in the future, and then if you could go back into the past and call any sporting moment. So first, the future. If you could wave a magic wand and be in the seat on the mic for something to happen, what would it be?
Can I already... Yeah, but it's already happened.
Right.
It was last year's Masters, the 2019.
Might as well retire then.
Yeah. Well, if Jim Nance says it's the greatest moment he's ever done and he's been in television for 35 years, well then, Luke Elvy can't say no, there's something more significant than this.
Take us back.
Well, it was last year's Masters, and Tiger Woods is 18 days older than I am. I had been following this kid since he was 10. He sprung to prominence, started to win a lot of events. There was like a golf magazine you'd get at your local club, and I'd read all about him. I knew all about this Tiger Woods kid who was literally 18 days older than me. So basically, I never went to university, but he was my life's work. He's my thesis. You know, anything about Tiger Woods, you know, I can tell you. And I obviously did most of his career before, like, of winning majors before I'd left Australia. So I was doing it for Fox Sports in Australia, off the television, not at the venue. So I'd never been able to call a major championship win. I'd been able to call PGA Tour wins, but never a major championship win. And my holes are 15 and 16 at Augusta National. And last year, the way the story just kept sort of bubbling away throughout the course of the week. And there on Sunday, he got into that final group because they had the big storm coming, and they went off split tees, groups of threes for the first time early in the morning. And it's like, he got into that final group with Tony Finau and Francesco Molinari. And if you remember Molinari's start, he played lights out the front nine, got up and down out of ball washers. It was like, he's not going to lose this. Tiger had lost to him just the summer before at the Open Championship at Carnoustie. And then all of a sudden, he rinses one in the water at Rays Creek on 12. This is Francesco. So did Finau. And Tiger hits it an extra 15 feet left of where he was intending to, just to safely get across the creek. That Brooks Koepka had hit on the water as well in the group before him, and one other player who was in contention at the time. And I'll never forget that image where Tiger's standing on the 12th green and the two players in his group are back across the other side of Rays Creek, taking a drop and hitting their shot. And it was the two-shot swing that put him into the, hey, Tiger's going to win this, or he could win this. And then we know what happened. And, the birdie at 13 to get right there. And then when he birdies 15, which was the first of our two holes, and he played it perfectly. Like, it was just flawless. And I thought to myself, he's going to do this. Tiger's going to climb Everest 12 years after he fell off it. You know, he fell off it and tumbled all the way to the bottom. He dusted himself off. He went through the public humiliation with his affairs. He went through the indignity of being addicted to pain-killing medication and had through 2 stints in rehab, all the surgeries, you know, a fused back that he thought he may never walk again, let alone play golf. And then he hits a shot that almost went in the hole on 16 to a foot. And I'll never forget it, because once we're done and they're in the last group, we usually go into the truck and watch the finish together. And I said to the guys, I'm sorry, I've been waiting for this my whole life. And I darted up the hill to 18 to watch him come up, and, you know, just the goosebumps, the hair on the back of the neck stuff. It's the stuff that you dreamt of as a little boy was starting to come to real life in front of your face. And you just called the moments that he'd gone one in front and then sort of 2 shots to ice the win. And incredibly, we get to be positioned underneath the 18th tower because of our accreditation. And when Tiger came up to hug Charlie, his boy, and then the whole family, you'll see it in the video if you watch it again. I'm about 5 feet away from him in a blue top. And the moment was so magnetic that I started walking towards him. I'm like, oh, I'm going to say, back away. This is not your family and your moment, you know.
Get out of the way, kid. I need to hug Tiger.
Right. And the camera crew for CBS, it's like, our golden rule is don't get in the shot. So I'm like, I just grabbed this huge human and shoved him straight in front of me. The cameras couldn't say I was there, but I was like, wow. And that was just so magnetic, that moment. I thought, this is it. This is what all that work for all those years to get to this moment, to have that opportunity, was what it was all about. I'm like, if I don't ever do another thing in this business again, I've got that. But, you know, if I get to call another dream sporting moment, maybe the Wallabies winning the World Cup in the United States in, what is it? I think at the end of the decade, 2029, or whenever the next World Cup they're planning to have there. That'd be pretty cool. I'd like to do that. Working for a network in the States, calling my nation to win a World Cup again. Because, look, Australian rugby's a bit like Tiger Woods in 2010 to 2015, isn't it? It's in the dumps. It needs to pick itself off the floor. So being a rugby boy, that'd probably be it.
So you've been away from Australia now, permanently living in Canada for how long?
5 years. We moved full-time at the start of 2015. And, you know, now my boys are growing up as Canaussies. We joke about that a bit. I had one born in Australia, one born in Canada, but we're all dual passport holders. So I'd be surprised if things go the way they're going that I'd ever get to live back in Australia again. Who knows what happens in life? We don't truly know, but if I can come back, 3 to 4 times a year calling Australian tournaments, but then spend the bulk of my year over here, that's probably how it's going to play out going forward.
That's a beautiful segue, Luke, into our next question. You've got a lot of great memorabilia we can see behind. There's a 2019 flag that looks like it's been signed by the great man, and then there's even Adam Scott in the background. But what piece of Australia have you got in your house that just reminds you of back home? Like what's in your house, not from a sporting point of view, but what's that little piece of Australia, Arnold, you've got in your own house?
Vegemite. I have it 3 to 4 times a week, and it's a classic because when people come over, they're like, "Oh, is that stuff that you guys eat?" And they'll try it and whatever. My kids love it. It's Australian. It's Vegemite, right? And I take it with me on the road. I've got the portable tubes. I'll have it on a piece of toast because I just that whole PB&Js, the peanut butter and jellies. I'm just like, no, that's too sweet. I want a breakfast, energy. But in the respect of Australiana, that's it. But in terms of memorabilia, it's my Adam Scott image of when he won the Masters in that green jacket photo, and it sits in my golf simulator room, which I'm fortunate to have in the house, and he personalised it as well. So this is the Jason Day winning the PGA flag signed by Jason and Cole. Almost got another one this weekend, but it's that Adam Scott image because to me that was one of our greatest ever sporting moments, Adam winning that. So they're the 2 big reminders for me.
The problem that Americans have with Vegemite is they slather it on like it's peanut butter, right? We'll whack it on there. And no Aussie can even eat it like that. It blows the top of your head off. So if you have it, this thick, of course it's going to be a bit harsh. You just need you've got to teach them to have a scraping of it.
I don't know whether either of you guys have seen it, but Hugh Jackman on Jimmy Fallon gives the greatest lesson on how to have Vegemite that you've ever seen live on air, where he just says, get the toast out, nice and warm, a little bit of butter on there, just a little bit of Vegemite, and the look on Jimmy Fallon's face, he's like, what do you mean? You don't lather it on? And he goes, yes, you don't lather it on.
No, you can't. It'll blow your head off.
He did the same with Oprah when Oprah came out to Australia and did those shows, if you remember, and the one at the Opera House. He did the same thing. Talk about a great ambassador for Australia, Hugh Jackman.
So if you had a care package, if your doorbell rang right now and you had a care package coming from Australia, what 3 things would you want to be in that care package?
Yeah, easy. Vegemite, number 1. The natural confectionery companies like the
snakes and stuff. Yeah, party mix.
Party mix. I'm a sucker for those. It's phenomenal. And Milo. I love my Milo, mate. I was a Milo kid. Throw it on my ice cream and throw it in the glass of milk and stir it up. It's just Milo. It's Australia, isn't it?
And if you could have any 3 Aussies, past or present, rock up to your house for a good old-fashioned Aussie barbecue, who would you invite, past or present?
Alan Border, Mark Ella, and Billy Birmingham.
That would be a good barbecue.
Yeah. Got to have the 12th man. I got to work with him a fair bit at Fox Sports for a stint, and I basically spent my entire teenage years ripping him off all the greats. So Billy'd be outstanding fun to have some beers with.
And look, the final one from me, Luke, and a big thank you for giving us your time today. It's been awesome to sit down with you and talking about all your adventures, Aussies abroad. But speaking of which, what advice would you give to Aussies thinking about going overboard and overseas and chasing their dreams?
Yeah, that's a tough one now, Corey, because the world's even changed since I, made the transition. Before, you'd say get in at the bottom rung, just whatever opens that door, get in, and just don't say no. If they say, we need you here between midnight and 6 in the morning when all your mates are going out and having a big booze up, or, people are partying and you're missing out on weddings and social events that are important to you, just say yes, do everything that they ask you to do and learn every bit about the business. But are those days in media gone? I don't know. You know, do you just start a social media channel, become popular, and the world's your oyster? I mean, I truly don't know what the right path is these days for the kids, because there are so many different and fragmented pieces of media these days with the digital world. But to get into, like, internationally, if they wanted to call football in Europe, or, you know, cricket in Asia, or, you know, sports in the United States, is you just got to start building relationships that connect you to those places that could potentially open doors, and, you know, speak to those who are doing what you do. When I got to Fox Sports, I took Warren Smith out for a beer. I said to Warren Smith, the great rugby league caller, I said, Warren, how do you do what you do? You know, Mike Gibson mentored me for a bit, which was lovely. When I got to the States and I got to spend some time with Jim Nance, you know, you pick their brains, ask them how do they get to where they get to, because you're learning from the people who've made it. You're not learning from a university lecturer who's talking about people who've made it. You're talking to the people who've made it. And that's where you learn the stuff that really enhances your hopes of career. And relationships, and just somehow open a door. And when it's open, shove your foot in there, wedge it open, and then just keep grinding until the opportunity presents itself that you're ready to take.
That is superb advice. That's the only way to do it, Luke. Well done. And look, we're so proud of everything that you've achieved, and we look forward to seeing what the road ahead has for you. It's been a remarkable journey. And as I said at the start, do not underestimate how difficult it is to be a non-American. And we've got a few. We've got Finchy, but he's an ex-player. We've got Lee Diffie, who's doing it in the motorsport world. We've got you doing it in the golf world. It is really, really tough. So what you've achieved is incredible. Congratulations, and thanks for your time on Aussies Abroad.
Thank you, Jason, and to you also, Corey. What you guys are doing is amazing as well. Just opening the eyes to the Australian public about the great sporting success stories right across the globe, because our Aussies continue. They have always done, and they will continue to punch above their weight. And they make it against the odds way more than a national person would. You know, an American playing on the PGA Tour, or an Englishman playing in the Premier League. You know, that their odds are so further stacked against them that keep highlighting those stories, guys, because it's terrific what you're doing.
Good on you, mate. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me.
So if you know of Aussies doing great things in sport, business, or entertainment anywhere around the world, reach out to us. Drop us a line on our socials and let us know. We'll start following, and we'd love to share their stories, Corey.
It is, Joe. So you can go to Twitter, which is @Aussies_abroad, or at Instagram and Facebook, it's @Aussies Abroad TV.
Yep, doesn't need to be the big names. It can be the quiet achievers. Sometimes they've got the very best backstories. We'll add them to our list. We'll go chase down those stories and bring them to you in the weeks and months ahead. That's it for this week's show. Coming up next week, we've got a fantastic lineup. We're going to catch up with Australian NFL punter Aaron Sipos and talk about his incredible journey from the AFL through college football and into the pros. We're also going to catch up with Ezi Magbagor, the young lady, the youngest player in the WNBA. She's in the Rookie of the Year conversation. She's having a fantastic season over there in Florida. We'll look back at the Indy 500. We'll look ahead to the Tour de France. That's all coming up next week on Aussies Abroad.